Hey, you guys, it's Carolyn with Homesteading Family, and welcome to this week's edition of the Pantry Chat Food for Thought. This week, we're talking about the simple steps you can take to help avoid garden overwhelm. Yes, it's that time of year that the garden is starting to take over our lives, and it can really quickly feel like it's out of control and it's just kind of this overwhelming monster. So there's some tried and true tips that I have found that really help me to keep gardening under control so it doesn't feel like it's running my life even in the middle of garden season. So we'll be covering those tips and tricks today. But first, let's jump in to a question of the day. Let's see. Vera Kessler on the easy chicken and gravy recipe says, I have a problem with the lids coming off of my jars in the canner. Am I not tightening them enough? Oh, yes. If your lids are actually coming off your jars, you definitely need to tighten them down more before the canning process. This is something that you should not have happening, and it means you definitely do need to give it a little bit more oomph when you're tightening those jars down. Directions for canning really talk about not over tightening the jars. The reason for that is that as your jars are processing, they actually do have to release those water vapors, that steam, right? Otherwise, the lids will buckle and it will ruin your seal. So you do need to have a little bit of play in there so that the steam can actually release. Now, what you don't want is so much play in there that the lids can actually just pop right off in the canner. That would be very counterproductive to what you're doing. So you want to make sure that you tighten them down enough that when you go to open them, like right there after you tighten them, you do have to give it a little bit of strength. It's not like one of those jars that, you can't get off. You have to go hit it with a knife or something like that. Not like that. That's too tight. But you do want there to be some resistance when you go to open it. If there's no resistance, it is way too loose. So you do want to tighten it down a little bit more. They generally call that finger tight, which generally just means give it a good, turn with your hand. Don't like crank it with your whole arm. You don't have to get your whole arm involved in there. On the other hand, if you are maybe not as strong, maybe you do need to give it a pretty good crank there. So again, make sure when you go to open it immediately after closing it, if you just test it by trying to open it, it has a little bit of resistance right in there. And that should get you dialed in to just the way it should be. Okay, one more question from Val on fermented ginger carrots. She says, I tried it and there was barely any liquid coming out of my carrots. I added a quarter starter liquid, 1.5 tablespoons salt, and pounded them for 10 minutes. Any suggestions on how to fix that? So Val, what's probably happening there is your carrots had maybe sat in storage for a little bit longer and they weren't as juicy as fresh carrots. That actually can happen quite a bit. This can also happen with sauerkraut. It can happen with beets if you're fermenting beets. Most things that you ferment, if your produce has dried out a little bit, lost some of that water weight, it might not produce enough of its own brine. And that's okay. If that happens, just top it immediately off with some plain water. Remember, you already have plenty of salt in there. So just add a little bit of plain filtered, just a nice clean water to that to top it off. And that will be just fine. You don't need to add any extra brine. For one, you don't need any additional salt from what you already have in there. So that plain water will be just fine. Now, do remember when you're fermenting something, put it into something like a casserole pan because it is very common for the brine to start coming back out of the jars as your ferment hits an active ferment stage. That's a very normal thing. And then what can happen after that, during active ferment, all the bubbles that are created, everything that happens in there, inside that jar with the fermentation process, with all those gases being built up, it will actually push that brine out of your jar. So you want that bowl, or you want the casserole pan or something to collect that so that it's not getting all over your counter. But what happens is, as active fermentation slows back down, you then are left with less brine in your container, which can mean that your food isn't all underneath your brine anymore. Oh no, that's not what you want. If that happens, you can definitely just top off your ferment again with some very clean water. Again, you don't need any more salt. You have plenty of salt in there. And if it's already actively fermenting, you're in really good standing. But just top it off with a little bit of clean water and it'll be just fine. So let's take a moment right now to thank our sponsor. This week's Pantry Chat sponsor is Azure Standard. Now, you guys know that we personally use Azure Standard here in our house. We have for well over a decade. And it is the company that we trust for our bulk orders so that we don't have to rely on getting everything from the grocery store. You can get anything for your pantry as well as for your barn and your garden at Azure Standard. I like to stock up on things like bulk grains, flour, noodles, canning jars and lids, maple syrup, cocoa powder, spices, amazing apple juice sweetened dried cranberries. Oh my gosh, that's our favorite. Vinegar. We do bulk vinegars, olive oil, citric acid, salt, coconut products like coconut oils, things like butter. There are so many things that you can get from Azure Standard, and we get a lot of them. A lot of our bulk products come directly from there. So if you guys aren't familiar, Azure Standard is a food buying co-op, which means that in this case of Azure Standard, they actually drive a truck to your area and you go pick up. So it's not being shipped to you through the mail or through a shipping company. They actually send a truck out to your area. But if you don't know if there's a drop location near you, you can look at their website and they have all of that information right there, as well as contact information for the drop coordinator. So there might be one really close to you. You'll want to check that out. Use the promotion code HomesteadingFamily15, all one word, for 15% off your very first order. This is for new customers only, with an order of $100 or more to a drop location. So you can get 15% off of that first order. We'll have a link for you down in the show notes or in the description below. Thank you, Azure. Let's jump into our topic of the day, which is avoiding garden overwhelm. I think this is such a good topic because, back in the winter time when there's so much time and there's no gardening, and you start getting all of those gardening catalogs and seed catalogs, and you're just dreaming, oh my goodness, the garden seems so filled with possibilities, right? You're like, oh, I can plant this and I can plant that, and I can have 3 colors of carrots and, 4 different varieties of green beans and all of these different things. But spring always arrives and reality always hits. And we go, wow, this is where now we have to actually get all the work done. And even when we have all the plants in the garden, there's still all the maintenance of the garden. And then there's the harvesting. And that alone adds a whole nother element and a whole nother amount of work that can become really, really overwhelming. So here are some of the things that I have found that really help me to avoid that feeling of garden overwhelm. Now, keep in mind, we have three very large gardens and an orchard and a whole lot of livestock. So when we're talking about our gardens, we're talking about gardens that feed 15 to 18 people year round. So we're probably doing more work than you need to do for your family. So if I give an amount of time here today that I'm talking about that we spend, then just know that you can probably cut that way down because you probably have a much, much smaller garden than we actually do here. You're probably not providing for nearly as many people. The first thing that I find is just non-negotiable for keeping garden overwhelm under control is to take a daily walk through your garden with a notebook. I know this sounds a little counterintuitive because we're not actually doing work, right? But what you're doing is you're observing. You're walking by each bed in your garden and you're looking at it. Are there weeds coming up? Are there insect problems? Do you have missing plants? Do you have places where you could tuck another plant into that garden because maybe a transplant didn't survive? Do you have an upcoming harvest? Is something just about ready to harvest? Is something past being ready to harvest and you need to go and remove something old from the plant? That's what you want to be doing and asking yourself as you walk through the garden every single day. Now, you could do this first thing in the morning if you want. You could do it in the evening as something just pleasant to do at the close of your day. I find that a really nice thing, just to walk through the garden, just, enjoy the fruits of your labor, enjoy the actually just being in the garden, but keep a list or some little notebook, something that you can write a list on, and note when you start seeing something that really needs to be taken care of. Now, those things that you need to take care of generally fall in one of two different categories when it comes to the garden. They fall into big project day, or they fall into keep up with it, small chunks of time type of time. So you really want two lists. As you're walking through and you see something that you're like, wow, okay, all of the green beans need to be picked and they need to be, snapped into bits, and then they need to be preserved. That's probably going to fall on a big chunk of time. It's probably, depending on how many green bean plants you have, that's probably going to be a larger project and not just a few minute project. But as you're walking around and you notice, hey, there's a few weeds poking up here and there, or there's a little bit of harvesting that I need to do, that's really going to land on your little small chunk of time list. Every single day, you want to devote a very small amount of time to your garden. Now, this amount of time is going to be relative to the size of your garden. For some of you guys who have a small space, maybe you're only growing for 2 to 4 people, you're probably going to be able to spend between 5 and 15 minutes every day just working through the rows. Start at one end of the garden and get as far as you can get in about 10 minutes of weeding. And then the next day you're going to pick up at that spot. And then make sure you give yourself about 5 minutes to go through and do any harvest you need to do for that day. And that's your garden day. You just work through and do some of those basic, simple tasks. Now, for us, because of the size of our gardens, what we tend to do is spend about an hour every morning in the garden. And we'll do that pretty much from Monday through Saturday. And that's our time where, again, we're getting any weeding done, we're planting out new beds of something, but we're just doing it in smaller chunks of time. We're not taking a whole day and working out in the garden. This kind of just daily little bit here and there, this is really your key to successful gardening. There's an old saying that there's no better fertilizer than the shadow of the gardener, which just means the best thing you can do to make your plants grow well is to get out there and be observing them, to be actually in the garden, actually interacting, actually watching. The more that you're out there seeing things, the more you're going to know right at the beginning of a, potential pest infestation. You're going to know right at the beginning of something not growing as well as it should and maybe needing some extra compost or some extra organic fertilizer. You're going to see what's happening and you're going to get to know the characteristics of your garden and of your different garden plants by being out there every day in those small chunks of time. Again, what I love to do is just start at one end of the garden and work through getting as much done as possible, just working right through the garden. And then when my time's up, I stop working. I stopped working right there. And the next day we pick up in that spot and keep going. And when we get all the way to the end of the garden, we go back to the beginning and we start over again. Sometimes it takes several days to get all the way through the garden. If you are using some of the other methods that we're going to talk about in just a minute to help simplify your gardening, that's going to be about all you need to keep up with the basic maintenance of your garden. It's just not going to take that long. Now, aside from having your daily small time, I really recommend setting aside one larger chunk of time weekly. Again, this is really going to depend on the size of your garden. For us, we tend to take a whole day. We take Saturday. But again, we're pretty much growing a small market garden. So, that is not going to be what most people need. But for us, 1 4 to 5 hour chunk of time once a week really helps us to wrap up all the other jobs that we need to get done out in the garden. For you, it might just be, if you're in a small garden, that might just be 1 hour in a big chunk. It might be 2 hours on a Saturday morning before it gets too hot out. So you'll just have to play with your time and see what time it is that you need. But the idea is to set regular weekly time where that, if you have that bigger project coming, if you have to plant out a whole nother bed of something, or you need to really harvest everything out of a bed and then get that bed ready for whatever the next crop is, any of those larger projects, you can count on having time set aside for, so you don't have to feel overwhelmed because it's already in your calendar. So starting right at the beginning of garden season, I really recommend that you just put that literally onto your daily calendar, whether that's on your phone, whether that's on, a paper calendar in your house or your scheduling notebook, whatever it is, put it in there and get it set aside. Don't wait to do that every week because we all know things fill up. Things get a little busy, especially in summer, and you need to have that time set aside so that as you start feeling like, oh, there's a bit to get done out here, you can go, yeah, and I have the time already set aside to do it. So you don't have to feel that stress or that overwhelm. Okay, another thing that I have really implemented in our garden that has really, really saved me a lot of feelings of overwhelm is to create a master calendar. Now, by a master calendar, I mean I made one calendar years ago and I stick to it. I still use that same calendar. I still adjust it a little bit where I find that maybe my dates were off a little bit. But even though the dates on the calendar don't line up with the right day of the week, I still have all of my tasks written out on that calendar. And the longer I use it, the more we refine it. So what I did is I got one of those calendars where you literally can see 3 months at a time. They're kind of an interesting little thing that hang on the wall and they pull off. You can rearrange where each month is on this setup. So it's really easy. What I like to do is have my current month, my upcoming month right below that. And below that, I like to have a page of notes, which comes with the calendar. And what I do is that for every month, I just write right on the calendar, hey, plant these things in seed trays indoors, or transplant these things outside this week, or whatever the task is, the major gardening task, I make sure that I get that right there on the calendar. And then I like to take 1 page of notes per major gardening month, and I write out all of the directions for what I need to do. So it would look like this. If we're talking the month of, let's say, April, I don't have my calendar right in front of me, so I'm making this up as I go. But if we're talking the month of April, I might have somewhere on the second week of April that we need to start all of the let's say tomatoes and, anything else that we're going to start in the garden. But then down on the notes page, I am going to detail every variety of tomatoes, how many of them to start, and how to like what size starter pots, any other particulars that we need to know about that. I am going to put that all down in the notes and write it down. What that means is next year, I don't have to think about when to start my tomatoes. I don't have to think about when to transplant my tomatoes. I don't even have to think about what varieties I want to grow unless I want to do something different than last year. All I have to do is go look at my notes and go, oh, yeah, that's right. I need to start 5 seed starting trays that are this particular size with this particular variety of tomato. It's all written down right there. What that does is it removes all that decision making that we end up having to do around gardening. That doesn't mean that you can't try new things every year. It just means the decisions, when you don't have time to make them, are already kind of written out for you. They're on easy mode. Now, you can do this like I did on a master calendar, which is actually a paper calendar, and just using that same calendar over and over again. I just ignore the days of the week. I just pretty much count it as, the second week of April. Or you could use something like the Seed Time Garden Planner, which is a program that kind of does all that for you and also gives you out your tasks when you need to do it. So that kind of automatically does it for you once you get it all scheduled in, once you get all the information plugged in. We'll put a link to that in the show notes for you in case you want to check that out. But this just is going to really reduce that overwhelm and that feelings of like, oh my gosh, I don't even know what I need to do right now. How many tomatoes do I plant? How many of what variety? And like, what exactly am I supposed to be doing? It just removes that. It also drastically reduces your garden planning, because as long as you're happy with what you did last year, you can just leave it the same and do it again. Another thing to use to reduce your gardening overwhelm is using a garden planner. Again, you can use something like the Seed Time Garden Planner. It's kind of a software program, does it all for you. Or you can use something a little more analog, a little more like physical, and that is a Clyde's Garden Planner, because that's going to give you all the information you need without you having to go search for it all over the place. A lot of times the overwhelm that we feel is information overwhelm. It's information overload. It's that, as soon as you try to go figure out what depth you should be planting your bell pepper starts at, you get more information than you bargained for, more information than you need. And before long, you are feeling just completely like a deer in the headlights and not sure what to do next. So using something like a really simple garden planner, I'll give you a link for that. Also, the one that Josh and I love and use every single year, just keeps you from getting into that information overload by having exactly what you need at your fingertips right there. It makes it really, really easy. It makes it easy to plan your master calendar also when you're doing that for the first time. Now, some of the things that you can do out in the garden to actually reduce your overwhelm out there, use mulch. Please use mulch. Make sure that you're using mulch. That helps so much, especially in your perennial beds, to reduce the weeds, reduce the watering, and overall just reduce your work. It really drops it down and makes it much, much easier. Another thing that I think is really important to think about when you're trying to reduce your garden overwhelm, especially if you're having a year where you just don't have as much time, is to make sure that you're focusing almost completely on the plants that actually want to grow and ripen in your area. These are the non-fussy plants. Now, I'm always saying this, but up here in North Idaho, tomatoes are not non-fussy plants. They don't like how cold it is. It is cold even in the heat of August. It can drop down into the low 40s in the overnight temperatures. Tomatoes aren't crazy about that. They struggle to grow, which means we baby them a lot. We spend a lot of time stringing up tomatoes, trimming back tomatoes so there's not too much growth on them. So they really focus on putting their energy into the fruit, doing all of the different things that you do with tomatoes to make sure that they're happy. And that takes a lot of time and a lot of oversight. In comparison to tomatoes, our root crops that we grow here need almost no attention. We put them in the ground, and aside from making sure that we don't have a bunch of weeds coming up, we don't really have to do anything else to them until it's harvest time, because they are so happily just growing, minding their own business, doing their own thing, that they're really, really easy to take care of. Those are the kind of non-fussy plants that you want to focus on when you have an overwhelming year or you're feeling that sense of garden overwhelm. So the way to find out this information for your area is probably to ask around to other seasoned gardeners. If you don't already know, you might already know, you may have had enough garden experience that you're like, oh, I know exactly what it is that grows well and exactly what doesn't. Stop trying to baby along the things that just don't grow well. And just, admit that that's for another season in your gardening life. That's for another time where we have a little bit more space to focus on the garden and spend a little bit more time babying those plants that just maybe aren't convinced that your garden is the perfect place for them for whatever reason. That could be heat. Unlike us who deal with cold, it could be heat. It could be a dry wind. There are so many different things that makes your gardening scenario unique. And there are plants that will thrive in your garden and in your environment. And there's other ones that are just going to struggle. So stick with the ones that really, really will thrive in your garden. Okay, now one last tip that is a huge time saver and really reduces on the overwhelm. This is kind of a funny tip. I bet you didn't see this one coming. That is, instead of spending your time at the grocery store, go shopping in your garden. When you actually start gardening in a way that is putting very real amounts of food onto your plate, there is a mental shift that has to happen. We're very used to the grocery store. We're very used to meal planning like we have a grocery store around the corner. All of a sudden, you have a garden that has stuff out there. And maybe it has stuff out there that you're not really used to eating that much of. Maybe, what's out and growing in the garden right now is kale. And you're kind of like, well, we like kale once every so often, but kale every day of the week, that's a different story. I don't really know how to use it that way. And so it can be really easy at the beginning of your gardening journey to still go to the grocery store, even though you've got great food sitting out in the garden, just because you're not entirely sure what to do with it or how to make it palatable to your family yet again. The great thing is when you just kind of get to that point that you go, okay, I give up. I'm just not buying things. And if I have something in the garden, we're just going to eat what's in the garden, even if we have to eat it for 3 weeks straight. That's what we're going to eat. We're not going to go grocery shopping. What this is going to do is it is going to save you time, and it is definitely going to save you money, but it's also going to give you a better product. You're going to get a way more nutrient dense meal out of it than you would if you went and got something that's been sitting on the grocery store shelf for a while. So this is really going to be giving back to you, but maybe it's going to take a little bit of getting used to. Yes, it saves a lot of time. Saves time by not driving to the store. Now, I don't know about you. Maybe you have a grocery store, 5 minutes away. For me, it's about 35 minutes to get to a grocery store. And so the thought of just running to the store, well, there is no just running to the store. You're into it by an hour and a half at the very minimum by the time you get there, do some shopping and get back. That is a lot of time that could be saved. And you could do a few little gardening tasks, or you could be making an incredible dinner if you just went out and shopped in your garden instead of, running to the grocery store and spending the money at the grocery store. So make sure you're going there first And taking your basket, going out into that garden, harvesting whatever there is out there and thinking, what can I do with this? Stir fries are your best friend when it comes to gardening and bringing that food into the kitchen, especially if you have odd amounts of things. I have a video for you. I'll put the link down in the description of exactly how I take those seasons in the garden where I only have a little bit of a few different things, and how I turn that into a dinner without going to the grocery store. So you're going to want to check that one out. Above all, remember, the plants generally do pretty well taking care of themselves. If there's a few extra weeds, it's not going to end your garden season. Enjoy the garden. Make sure you get out there regularly because, again, being out amongst your plants in your garden is not only relaxing, it's not only fun and really enjoyable, but it's also the best thing for your garden, and it's going to help you keep up with the work in the garden in a way that's enjoyable and not overwhelming. Okay, you guys, it's been great hanging out with you today. Have a wonderful garden season, and I will see you really soon. Goodbye.